So, good afternoon to everybody, and greetings from Finland. I'm your facilitator today, and we have some serious tasks to do for the next 60 to 70 minutes. My name is Mikaela Ramschmidt. I'm the managing director of a Finnish NGO called the Baltic Sea Action Group. We have founded the Carbon Action Platform to scale regenerative agriculture. So the topic of today is something I work with every day. Our method to scale regenerative agriculture is to do it together with everybody needed, scientists, companies, farmers, policymakers, for example. We have as our rapporteur today, we have Ulla Luhtasela from Nestle, and then our host is Matthew Henry. I'm going first to shortly present the theme today for you and our tasks, and then we will have a really short introduction of everybody so that we know who is here. If you have any comments or questions, the chat is available, so just put your comments there. We will also use it for the discussion later on. So with the background of these presentations that we just heard, our task is to look at what the food chain can do. As already noted, scaling regenerative agriculture and nature-positive food production requires the input of everybody. We need to have all stakeholders in the whole food system involved. This is nothing that someone does alone. So our task is today to look at what the food chain can do. We will discuss opportunities. They are quite important, but we will also look at challenges and barriers in scaling regenerative agriculture. I'm going to share my screen now. I made a very short kind of supporting document here so that we have something to follow. Okay. So our question is to discuss how what is the support needed from the food chain for the adoption and scaling of regenerative agriculture. We have 3 questions that we are going to go through in the group with the focus on the third one. The most important question is the third one, because we need to be also solution oriented. Just a second so that I see the screen myself. Our first question is to discuss what the role of the food chain should be in supporting the adoption and scaling of regenerative agriculture, and in which areas can the sector be most effective. Our second question is to identify barriers that prevent the food chain from supporting the adoption and scaling of regenerative agriculture. The third one is to identify the key next steps that need to be taken to ensure the value chain can maximize its role. So we need to identify challenges, outline opportunities, and provide solutions. And the greetings from the organizers was to really be very solution focused, outcome focused. So we are expected to develop 3 to 5 actionable and feasible solutions. So that's why we will use a bit more time on question number 3. So then we could go into the presentations of the group, and I hope that it's okay. It would be really nice for everyone to have the camera on so that we are all present, but I understand if there are technical difficulties or something else preventing it. Most of us have the camera here. Okay. So if we take the presentations by starting with the organizers, and then I'll just pick you from the screen in the order that you are here, and we can start with Ulla, please. Just a few words. We have very limited time, so just the name and the organization and position, what you do.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ulla Luhtasela. I'm in Finland and I'm the Nordic Sustainability Manager for Nestle and a rapporteur here today. So I try to capture all the crucial points that you are bringing up today.
And then if Matthew would like to say a few words of who you are so that we know that you're here.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Matthew and I'm part of the European Landowners Organization. I'll just be here as a technical host. In case you need anything, feel free to drop me a message in the chats and I will do my best to assist you.
So thank you. We are the three organizers here that you can reach out to if there is anything you need. So then the first one on my screen is Felipe. Please, a few words about yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody, my name is Felipe from Brazil, now living in the Netherlands, where we founded Renature. So Renature is a Dutch organization working on making regenerative agriculture mainstream as well. So nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you. Then we have Robin.
Hello, my name is Robin Anderson. I'm joining you from Canada, and I have a company called Emerging Ag, which specializes in the agriculture sector, as the name implies. I'm from a farm in Canada, and we have the pleasure of coordinating the private sector mechanism to the UN Committee on Food Security. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. And then we have Charlie.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. I'm Charlie in the UK, in London. I'm here with Consumers International, membership organisation for around 200 consumer organisations across 100 countries. I've been leading our work towards the Food System Summit, especially involved in Action Track 2 on healthy and sustainable consumption, but keen to help break down silos between these action tracks, and also in the lever of change for innovation.
Nice to meet you. And the next one is Sandrine.
Hi, I am Sandrine Dury. I am working at CIRAD. This is a French organization working in the Global South, mainly in Africa, but also in Southeast Asia and Latin America. I am a food economist and I am following the UN Food Summit system for the CIRAD. Nice to be here.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Ornella is the next one on the screen.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Ornella Cosamati. I'm joining from Brussels, part of the PepsiCo public policy team. I follow EU agriculture and environment policy.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Elizabeth is the next one on the screen.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Lunik. I work for Rabobank's Food and Agri Research. We are an agricultural bank supporting farmers in Europe and globally. And yeah, I'm also participating in several projects trying to link private sector, public financing institutions, research, and align ourselves to support more regenerative agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. And Pascal.
Yeah, good afternoon. So I'm Pascal Chapeau. I'm an agronomist and I'm heading agriculture for the Nestle Group based in Switzerland.
Nice to meet you. Next one is James.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. James Eade. I work for Cargill, particularly in the starches, sweeteners and texturizing business in Cargill, based in Belgium, managing regen ag projects as well as sustainability programs with our raw material, right from seaweed to corn and wheat programs here in Europe as well.
Nice to meet you. And then we have Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sara Roversi. I'm the founder of the Future Food Institute. It is an ecosystem based in Italy, US, Japan, and China. And we run an ecosystem that is focused on education, community building, and innovation. And we are the partner of FAO for the organization of the Food and Climate Shapers Bootcamp in many different parts of the world.
Nice to meet you, Sarah. And then last but not least, we have Antonia.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Antonia. I'm excited for the discussions to come. I represent crowd farming. I'm an agriculture engineer working for crowd farming. We have been a startup revolutionizing the supply chain for food. We're active in Europe. We constructed a new digital marketplace for sustainable produce. Now over 500,000 consumers signed up and over 150 different farmers who are, parts of them are selling their whole harvest, all the product directly to the end consumer. And we give them a platform to directly communicate their type of agriculture and the consumer to choose the type of agriculture they want to support. We do have some regenerative farmers and we hope to have more in the future.
Nice to meet you. So now I think everyone has presented themselves. If I forgot someone or missed someone, just please speak up. So then I think we should start so that we will use all the time we have for the really important questions. I put in the chat the question number 1, and I remind you of the whole topic. The theme we have is that how can the food value chain support the adoption and scaling of regenerative agriculture? And question number 1 is to discuss what the role of the food chain should be in supporting the adoption and scaling of regenerative agriculture, and in which areas can the sector be most effective? So it's kind of a twofold question. We have limited time, as I said, approximately 1 hour, and we need to focus especially on the last one with solutions. So please, when we start the discussion, be mindful of the time and avoid long statements. So try to be really concise in your thoughts. We have a very diverse group here today, so I really look forward to a nice and very diverse discussion with many different angles. Ulla, as our rapporteur, will take notes and make a summary of the discussions then later for the whole dialogue group. So what would you say, who wants to start? What should be the role of the food chain in scaling regenerative agriculture, and where can the chain be most effective?
I can start with my French English. I can start.
Yes, please.
One very first idea is about certification or labelization. So the market can recognize the quality of products coming from regenerative agriculture. And there are many different ways to label products. The question will be who will pay, and is it a private label? Is it a public label, such a participatory labeling? So that's the idea we can have to imagine labels, private or public labels.
Thank you, Sandrine. And then Ornella is also having some thoughts.
Yeah, no, maybe just to get the conversation going, really. Just, I think from a brand owner perspective, I think we look at, let's say, the food system transformation as something that really needs to happen end to end, as we say. So, on one hand, yes, we definitely have to, promote the adoption of regenerative agricultural practices with our farmers, support and kind of learn with them what are the different practices that will actually make the whole system more sustainable and really transform it. But on the other hand, as brand owners, we also have a bit of a responsibility to really empower consumers to nudge consumers, to empower consumers to make more kind of sustainable consumption choices, so that they get to create a demand for these products as well.
Thank you. And then next is, I think, now I'm not quite sure in what order these were. Maybe Antonia was first and then James after that.
Don't worry. It goes in line maybe with the first contribution. I really think and I experienced that the supply chain needs to be in place. There needs to be some outlets, some ways we can, as a farmer, we can market our produce if produced in regenerative agriculture. Some market ways and market channels that are clear, that are really reserved for regenerative products, because it happens in organic as well. If you don't find an organic market, you cannot position your product and you will not receive the correct price for it. We have to check whether in our region, wherever we are active, we have these regenerative market channels available. And if not, we have to create these markets. And then once this is done, we can also probably sell our produce as a farmer. I'm always switching perspectives because I'm a farmer and I'm working in marketing as well. And then second point, once these markets exist and there's ways that work, this can be also a way of communication and has to be a way of communication. What is regenerative agriculture in the one way, and then what does the client, what does the consumer want of the agriculture today, and where's room for improvement in the other direction.
Thank you. Then James, as next, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it follows similar themes, but ultimately it's about connection across that supply chain. Many supply chains are not short, can be complex. So it's the opportunity to connect from the different players, whether it be a brand or whoever in that supply chain, down to the farmer in terms of demand, understanding of both the benefits of looking at regenerative agricultural systems, but also matching that through to market demand. We know that no one's going to put, well, ultimately, no one's probably going to put regenerative agriculture claims, particularly on a brand. So again, it's how it translates through to, you're not going to write, this farmer has produced cover crops on your breakfast cereal or something like that. So it's helping that translation through. The other piece I would say is consistency within that food chain as well, about what we expect as regenerative agriculture and how we measure, how we ultimately look at that impact and translate it. We're in the early stages of that currently in the process. So it's important to have that alignment, so we're not all going to farmers, or farmers aren't all coming to us with different messages around regenerative agriculture.
Thank you, James. Very interesting points you have here, and I think Charlie is the next one. I think, at least, I'm not quite sure in what order these came, but please, what do you think?
Thanks, Michaela. Yeah, I think a key point in terms of talking about the role of the food chain is identifying who the actors are that we mean when talking about the food chain. I just wanted to share, we held, in partnership with the World Farmers Organization last month, a series of dialogues between consumer representatives and farmer representatives. And a kind of a key takeaway very quickly there was the mutual support for regenerative agriculture, but the kind of feeling of inability on either side to kind of take action on their own to get there. Farmers not able to absorb the costs of a market, of reaching out to a market that they can't feel confident exists, and consumers in theory support and demand existing for sustainable products, but lacking either the money or the time to do the research needed to make those decisions. That the constraints in the marketplace as it currently exists mean that consumers can't lead that transformation either. So a big focus of that conversation was on what these kind of respective actors needed, kind of the middle stages of the value chain and government actors to do to empower both sides to really lead that transformation in a kind of cooperative way. I think is a pretty crucial approach to answering this question.
Thank you. Then Robin, I think you're next.
Thank you. And to echo James and Charlie's words, I think one of the challenges is that it probably won't be its own accredited system. There are so many of these accreditation models, it's becoming quite complex, and it may be helpful to focus on the specific pillars. And our opening speaker outlined several of them very effectively. I think one that can be honed in on is biodiversity. intercropping, cover cropping, crop rotation were discussed. And in this respect, thinking about the ways in which companies can add products to their value chain, including more traditional crops, more diverse crops, and trying to add those in as ingredients, particularly, or as new SKUs, could really drive a demand that links farmers to a market. So honing in on some of those pillars like biodiversity and creating demand would do a lot to create those regenerative practices in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there any other thoughts that you might want to add to these comments? We have time here now, so if you want to comment these thoughts that we've already heard.
Yeah, I can add something as well.
Yes, please.
Yeah, looking at you know, coming from Brazil and also like working a lot with like large scale farmers, we see there's a major challenge in mechanization and technology to support management and the harvest of diversified, complex regenerative systems that we implement. Because we're talking about, you know, if you want to have a more impact on carbon, biodiversity, soil regeneration, you need to incorporate trees in your system, right? So once you plant trees in systems that are based on monocropping and they're based on traditional machineries from John Deere that is not adapted to this sort of like environment, then it needs a sort of investment and transition finance, but also new technologies and machineries to understand how nature behaves and how can we use a more effective way to prune the trees, also to cut the grasses, to use that as a cover crop. And so I think one of the challenges for the food chain is to look at how can we, in order to adopt and scale regenerative practices, we need to you know, think about this sort of like technologies and machineries that is still not in the market. And the reason why not is because there is not enough volume of regen ag farmers in place. But we will not have enough volume of farmers if we don't have tools to support them to transition, right? So it's a rhetorical, like a chicken and egg kind of challenge, and that yeah, we need to take attention for that as well.
Thank you. And then I think at least James is probably the next. If you want to continue, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, there's been a lot of comments about linking up the market. I think we need to remember, well, you know, regen ag itself benefits. There is a lot of evidence to highlight that the benefit to farming systems on its own. So I think, yes, the market will help in the initial stages, but the volume that you'll be touching beyond that, we need to think about that. You know, if you look at the wheat volumes across Europe, they're hugely significant in many different markets. They're not where some big brands might be interested, but beyond that. So another part of the role of the food chain is to highlight that evidence and to support and show the farmers that of the movement of that transition. And it's not always going to be within a nice short supply chain that's directly linked to a brand, etc. So just to sort of highlight that other piece as well.
Thank you. And then I'm looking at the time. So Sandrine, we have time for your comment, and then I thought of just summarizing, and then we could go over to the next question. So please.
My comment was maybe more about the Felipe comment. Do you expect in the end, after this transition process, the generative agriculture will cost more than the conventional agriculture, or less? In the end, you will save money because you use less pesticides or chemical inputs.
Yeah.
But what is your expectation?
Yeah, like we try to design regenerative systems that can be the more self-sufficient as possible. So we plant like biomass trees or grasses that you can rely less on external inputs, so you can reduce the cost for fertilizers, pesticides, and so that you can have more your own local resource. Because the mistake of the organic and agriculture, that's why we do regenerative, is because goes beyond, is because the organic agriculture is making the same mistake as the conventional agriculture, which is still making farmers dependent on a external input. So we are mining resources from other landscapes, and the regenerative is about like having a more self-sufficient system over time. Of course, takes time, but you reduce the cost of external inputs. You increase the climate resilience. You increase the profitability per hectare because of diversification. So you can sell not only the coffee, but also the rubber, which is giving shade to coffee, for instance, for another company. And also you have payment for ecosystem services. So like now only carbon is specified, but we are measuring more and more biodiversity through bioacoustics, which is a fascinating tool that you install in farms that you can monitor the sound of the biodiversity of birds, like bees and so on. And then we see that impact investors are already willing to finance, to specify biodiversity. So with these four main elements, you can clearly see that there is a business case out of regenerative agriculture, which is less costly and more profitability per hectare.
So you have 4 market chains in the end. You don't, instead of one, you have maybe 4 or 10 market chains for one plot.
Exactly, and it's like if the conventional farmers, like monoculture farmers, they would realize how risky it is to have only one single crop, then they would really change from now on, because like the climate volatility is affecting all like the yields worldwide. This year we had 90% loss in viticulture production in France because of like intensive frost. We have like 60% loss on corn production, like from last week in Brazil, because of climate change. So, one single crop is the worst kind of risk mitigation strategy from farmers.
Thank you. Before going to the next question, I thought of just very briefly trying to summarize the topics that we discussed here so that we then can continue to the next one. Thank you for your very valuable comments and interesting viewpoints. We discussed, for example, the need for labels, certification, how to support farmers, also understand the actual practices, how regenerative agriculture is done. We discussed empowering consumers, how to teach them to make sustainable choices. We discussed the tools to market the products, regenerative products, how to do that. What are the marketing channels needed for that? Should there be different specific channels reserved for regenerative agriculture, or can they be sold among all other products? We talked about looking at the market demand, how to translate regenerative agriculture to consumers as well. What is the consistency within the chain? How to do this work so that we are consistent also in impact and in the measures, actions. We continued with discussing how to involve the farmers and consumers that might not now feel that they can't do anything, but how to kind of empower them, help them to really do the concrete actions, how to empower both sides. We talked about the complex system. We have climate and biodiversity. We have water effects when we talk about regenerative agriculture. Of course, the financial aspects for the farmer as well. So how do we address these different areas of regenerative agriculture and its impact? We talked about the investment needed for machines, new technology, and the dilemma of not having enough demand or volume yet, so that these technologies or machines would be developed. So the chicken and egg problem. And then at the end, we discussed if regenerative agriculture is an additional cost for the farmer or if it's a good business case instead. And what are the kind of the impacts or the change for the farmer when going into regenerative farming, and what could be the benefits. So these were this was my summary of what we discussed. I hope that I managed to gather your thoughts well enough. Now I put in the chat also our question number 2, and here we should now look at the barriers that prevent the food chain from supporting the adoption and scaling of regenerative agriculture. So the things that we just discussed, what should actually be done, but why isn't it done? What are the obstacles and the challenges there? What are the concrete barriers that should be tackled before we can go into, for example, those actions or changes that we just discussed?
If I may start, if you don't mind, yeah?
Yes, please.
I think one key barrier I see is the social structure that farmers have today, because, you know, like would be wonderful if farmers can start working more from a cooperative or association kind of environment where they really exchange knowledge and they, you know, they exchange the produce to sell their, you know, regenerative products together. And we see there's a huge challenge on forming this sort of like cooperatives and associations. Of course, you see some smallholder farmers like doing large cooperatives in Africa and Brazil and Asia, but it lacks still like some sort of structure and some sort of like ways, improving ways of working together. So I think the social structuring barrier is something that it prevents us to scale faster regenerative agriculture as well.
Thank you. Then Ornella is probably next.
Yeah,
please.
totally. Want to echo that. I think it's a very good point. I also think that it's a bit of a challenge, also because the regenerative agriculture practices might tend to be a bit more profitable in the longer term. So basically it might take a few years for farmers to actually see the return on initial investment. Or at the same time, it might be a bit not so interesting for farmers to actually change, right, and shift. So there's that, and I think in a way government could also kind of help by signaling support for these kind of practices. Also perhaps revisiting the way we look at subsidies. I think that's also something that was mentioned in the opening speech, with the all ecosystems, eco schemes and CAP perhaps as a good example. And then another thing is that we feel sometimes that there is a bit of a lack of a industry-wide standards and measurement, and perhaps even understanding of what regenerative agriculture is. So I think that's, I think that's something that if we set a kind of a clear baseline, then also innovation and technology could could support this shift, but starting from the same, basically from the same starting point.
Thank you. Then James is next, please. Now we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah. Two pieces here. One, supply chain structure. Fundamentally, we still work on short-term supply chains globally. So fundamentally, we're bringing a new management system in that's based on delivering over a minimum 3 years. Then we need to, as a supply chain, across that supply chain, invest. And you look at wheat as a commodity. It's not contracted down to farm level very rarely. It's not even contracted further up the supply chain. It's it can be bought off spot markets. It can be, in many cases, such as we do, have long-term relationships with our suppliers, but it's a different approach, a more of an annual approach. I think the other thing is, don't underestimate the farmer here. There is a huge aversion to risk. There is, we're asking them to do something completely new they've not looked at, lack of knowledge, these kind of issues as well. So we've got to give them and invest there in terms of bringing them forward. If you think in Europe, many farmers, maybe in their 60s, why do they want to change when they're probably thinking more about retirement, and rightly so. So it's, again, how we work in those kind of systems as well. So just some thoughts there.
Thank you, James. Sarah, you also have some thoughts.
Yeah, I was thinking about the cultural shift that we have to approach, and the fact that at the end we need to invest a lot in capacity development related to this topic. We're working a lot with the FAO on supporting the spread of the FAO Learning Academy, and we work with hundreds of farmers and young activists that are shifting from the traditional farming system and the traditional farming environment, maybe growing up in farms where their parents were running their companies in a very traditional way, and now they want to change things from the inside, and it's not so easy. So we need really to put in place systems, and for sure the CAP has something around that, but maybe not enough. Needs to be supported also on vocational schools, training youth in agriculture more and more, because this is really something big and is gonna change the way we are approaching the planet at large.
Thank you, Sarah. And then Antonia.
Yep, thank you. My internet is like on and off. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
It's not only like continuing with Sarah's thought, it's not only capacity building, I think, on the farming side, but also on the consumer side. And it's very, very much important, because we won't get stable and successful market models if we don't have a demand, and the demand can also be fostered and supported and created more demand by proper education. I think it's time to integrate nutrition and health, and maybe nutrition. I think origin of food, where does the food come from that we eat every day, should be an obligatory subject in schools. And this has been, at least in Germany, I know that has been in the discussion, and I think it's really time to do this, and this would help a lot also to improve the education and the knowledge that the consumer side has, because we are working on a daily basis with 500,000 of consumers, and we spend half the time explaining the different types of agriculture. And at least we are lucky, because we have only the clients that already know a little bit. That's why probably they signed up in our platform. But then there's, of course, the black number of a lot of people who've never really thought about these topics. I think to have loyal consumers will help us also to deal with the volatility and fluctuations of prices that we are challenged with right now as a farmer.
Thank you. Then I think Elizabeth is next with a comment.
Thank you, Michaela. Yeah, I wanted to a bit continue on this conversation we have a lot at the bank. Is I think there's work to be done on both with the production side with farmers and also the consumer side, because I think this whole what is regenerative agriculture for a lot of consumers is still not sure. And so they might like the ideas, but they of course express willingness to pay more for products that are produced in a more sustainable way. That's always the problem. Yes, I like the idea, but will I pay for it? So there's a lot of education to help consumers understand also like what is need to be paid for. I think is like true pricing. We can talk about like some of internalizing some of these externalities into the price. It's a scary thing for people. It's confusing. And I think people have echoed this. This transition is long-term. So it's a lot of knowledge. It's really knowledge intensive. So it maybe seems easier to do it with young, more educated farmers. They seem more apt to do it. They went to school. They're willing to integrate in technology that's needed to measure changes. So if we're going to make changes, we have to measure it and monitor it and report on it and communicate it. And young farmers are more apt to do this. We need blended finance models because it's as you said, possibly we deal with lower yields. We're doing multiple marketing and new marketing outlets. So I think yeah, it's very complex, but I think what's really important is, yeah, we think about both sides, how to constantly be communicating, measuring and monitoring it. So that's going to be technology. And we need some sort of blended finance approaches to this. I think the farm to fork is looking at it. Some of that is in it, but it's not so obvious how to link that to regenerative, specifically to regenerative in a fast way, in a precise way. Yeah. So yeah, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you, Ulla, have a technical comment, or do you want to ask for clarification before we go?
No, I also want to take part in the conversation. So
okay.
I am a little bit surprised that this conversation is really polarized to the farmers who are producing the products, and then to the consumers who are actually then eating the products, but there's quite a lot of stakeholders between, like the food companies. So it would be nice to hear also some views, like what about the other parts of the value chain and the companies? What is sort of barriers there, what you have seen or what you can imagine? Any comments on that part?
Thank you, Ulla. I was thinking about the same, and I think Charlie is now the next. So maybe you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, following up on the point about consumer education and information, I think that's clearly an essential part of it. And there is kind of a growing demographic of consumers who are interested in regenerative agriculture and will pay more. But if we want to really mainstream regenerative agriculture, you have to go kind of far beyond the consumers who are interested or even able to make those kind of choices. In terms of what other stakeholders can do, first of all, I mean, yeah, engaging with consumers on soil health or other kind of detailed aspects of regenerative agriculture is never going to work. I think coming back to the point about supply chain transparency, I think it's important not because you need to have all this information on the front of a product for consumers, but because this encourages change earlier in the value chain and allows for the kind of creation of more regulated, kind of independently verified standards that are easy to understand and can actually have an impact in that regard. Furthermore, regarding what other actors in the middle stages can do to encourage, certainly from the consumer side, different behavior. Again, it's these key issues of affordability and availability. I think so often in many parts of the world, consumers have no option to buy sustainable choices, and this conversation about how to help consumers pick the good option instead of the bad option, I think surely has to be secondary to the conversation of how we can make sure that all of the options provided are to some extent meet a certain standard and are better than what's currently available, and to take that burden off consumers, but without putting it all on farmers, and making sure that kind of responsibility is shared more evenly throughout the value chain.
Thank you. Then I think Antonia is next up, and then a question to Elizabeth is that a new hand or an old hand you have there? So Antonia,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, thanks. My hand is a new hand. Definitely, it's true. The supply chain, the food chain, the intermediaries, the food companies. I think personally, the shorter the shorter the supply chain, the easier many things will be. From my personal point of view, especially in the case of regenerative products and how to bring them from the farm to the consumer, all the steps in between. There needs to be some sort of process. It might be a label, it might be a certification, but it might be another type of auditing process and a lot of transparency. Some sort of system, which I can't imagine right now, how it would have to work to guarantee that we have the same information and as much information as we can provide to the consumer at the end of all these steps that the food sometimes has to go through.
Thank you, Antonia.
I think this is definitely a barrier.
Thank you, Antonia. I'm looking at the time now, so Ornella, then we need to, you can make a comment and then we go on to the next question. So please.
Totally, very quickly. I think obviously, also food companies, as food companies, we do get to work directly with some farmers, so some of the challenges for them in a way also become our own, and we're trying to really help and facilitate their kind of, finding a way for these practices to make business sense for them. So that's also why we're actively involved sometimes in policy measures like the carbon farming initiatives that is being shaped at the moment. But then at the same time, of course, also our responsibility in a way to have demand and highest requests from our suppliers for the indirect ingredients that we source. So I think in a way it's more of a kind of, there's a bit of a need to always have higher ambitions and then trying to have the supply chain meet your request in a way.
Thank you, Ornella. And now when going to the last question, that is kind of the really important one with the solutions, I'll now summarize with focusing on the food chain. We had many different barriers that we went through. We talked about the social structures of the farmers, of the cultural change, capacity development for the farmers, and also about the choices and what can the consumers do, what do they need. But if we then look at the food chain, kind of those that are in between the farmer and the consumer, we discussed, for example, the standard for regenerative agriculture. We discussed that already under question 1 as well. What is the standard? What is the baseline for the industry? What is the supply chain structure? We talked about short-term supply chains now as the norm. We talked about also too long supply chains. I think these are actually really important obstacles now when we talk about the challenges and what should change. What is happening in the supply chain? Who has control? And what can different intermediaries do in the supply chain? Especially if it's built on an idea of short-term interest instead of long-term. As we noted, the benefits of regenerative agriculture may come with a bit longer time. They are not evident in 1 year or immediately. We talked about building also the demand, that demand can be fostered. What is the role of the food chain actually here now? How can the food chain raise the demand itself? What kind of education of consumers, for example, is needed? What is the support that can be given to farmers? How can we help consumers understand where food comes from? How is this explained to the big mass of consumers, not those that are conscious? What do we do with the fact that most consumers don't want to pay more? Some may not even have a choice. Food is expensive for them, so they can't pay more. Maybe understand also what they pay for. We talked about finance models, blended finance models, how to support the change, supply chain transparency, and working also with the farmers. This is kind of those things that I picked up here now. And now the next one, the question number 3, we are going to start with, I'm putting it in the chat. So now this is the place where we need to come up with the 3 to 5 real concrete solutions, what the food chain can do. Now we are not asking what the farmer should do or the consumer should do, but what should the actors do in between? What are the 3 to 5 key things that should happen there as solutions? We are not taking the same round as we did earlier, but now I'm asking all of you to write down your solution in the chat. First, we take 5 minutes for this, and then we can have a short discussion and comments after that. So it's 3 minutes to 4 now, so 2 minutes over 4, we start the discussion. So please write your thoughts in the chat with the solution. Thank you. Okay, I hope you're ready now. Very good points, quite big issues actually. I think that we have very interesting actions, but they are also, I mean, they are heavy, which is needed to really scale things and get impact. So there are many points that we have here. I hope you all see the comments in the chat. So if I just summarize very briefly, this was an interesting point about having a market for more diverse crops, creating better opportunities for crop rotations and diversification. This is actually something we see in Finland on the Carbon Action Platform. We note that the market doesn't support crop rotation, for example, because you tend to have one contract with one buyer that always buys, for example, the wheat or barley. Traceability is raised here, also storytelling of the product, educating the consumer. What can public procurement do to change the system? How to support farmers financially and educationally to make the transition, I mean, educating farmers concretely. How to align on principles within the supply chain to understand what regenerative agriculture means. Moving to longer term models, what are the models that the supply chain works on? You have also suggested impact measuring, how to actually impact the outcome-based impact, and don't confuse with different labels. I think this is also one really important topic, that if we create now a world of different certification schemes, for example, we just add to the complexity. Once again, longer term contracts, the long term approach is obviously something that needs to be done. Indicators of social and environmental performance, for example, how to incentivize sustainable food options, shorten the supply chain. Yeah, there are many different points, and now to enable the last minutes for discussion, I open the floor to your comments. Would you like to add something? Would you like to comment? What do you think is actually the most important now, if you look at the chat with the concrete actions? Where are the 3 to 5 the most important changes or the solutions that we need? Who wants to start? Okay, Elizabeth, please.
Maybe I just throw out an idea to start. I see a little bit there's just a disagreement or an open discussion about what is regenerative, and therefore it's kind of a little bit like stalling us from moving forward, you know, and saying this is it, this is good, these practices are good, let's figure out how to scale them up. So we're a lot of around language, you know, is regenerative agriculture sustainable agriculture, climate smart agriculture? But actually we know what it is, and we know practices, the basic practices which we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, which are good. And this is slowing us down a bit, and because also then measuring it and monitoring and showing that it makes impact. So I think outcome based, any sort of measurement is necessary. Traceability and transparency will come along with that, and that's needed to show to the whole supply chain, to consumers, to even farmers themselves, these practices are valuable. Again, maybe the value comes in 3 years and not the first year. So I think we need to I hope we can move forward and say, there's a lot of interesting discussion, but we know these practices are good. Let's figure out how to scale them up and not get caught up in the complexity, and measure and monitor and communicate the impact of the practices.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Who wants to continue on this interesting point? Sandrine, please.
Actually, this is an excellent question. For me, there is no international consensus about what is generative agriculture, and it's quite confusing. That's why I wrote my comment in the chat. And for consumers, we say we must educate consumers, we must teach them, but we do not even how to characterize good practices. And I'm afraid that we create confusion, we create, misleading, signals, and in the end, people will just they don't care because they do not understand what is the difference between organic, between agroecological practices, between whatever, everybody invent a new trademark and say, it's my. So what would be interesting is to promote a collective action in between different stakeholders. The big producers, the big farmers, the big companies, to say, okay, let's have a minimum of consensus to promote and to describe, as you said, Elizabeth, to monitor what are our practices and make just a minimum standard or whatever. I don't know exactly, but yes, it's the idea of kind of platform for regenerative or agroecology or nature-based solutions, good practices, and we can agree on a very large base, if possible. Not sure.
Thank you, Sandrine. Charlie, what do you think?
Great, thank you. Yeah, following on from that, it's something that comes up so often. It's about the challenges of creating like a single standard for how to identify something as sustainable and as positive, even once you get beyond all of the environmental barriers to have to make sure it's socially sustainable and economically viable for farmers. But I think drawing on what Sandrine said, I think there is potentially in the short term, while we work on reaching that positive standard, there's action to be taken on just ruling out setting minimum standards for what isn't sustainable and what isn't viable, and what we need to kind of eliminate from the supply chain as far as possible, having collective action from actors throughout the supply chain to make it clear what isn't okay and what shouldn't even be an option. Again, going back to that, allowing consumers to choose between good and better rather than good and bad. So I think there's that balance of setting positive standards of sustainability, but also making it clearer to everybody what isn't acceptable and what we need to be phasing out.
Thank you, Charlie. Interesting point. I haven't actually thought about that as a solution. When we also discussed the need for a standard, we can do it that way too. Robin, please.
Hi, I think that Charlie is putting out something very provocative, but also quite challenging in the sense that really it's not about what you are or aren't doing, it's really about the outcomes, right? And I think that's because we were talking about a lot of technologies that haven't even been deployed yet. Is it because you are using precision agriculture or you aren't using precision agriculture? In the end, though those things are enabling, as Felipe was saying, it will actually involve, are we getting outcomes on soils we want? Are we seeing biodiverse production of crops with strong rotations and a more diverse food basket, which should also lead to nutritional outcomes? Are we seeing safe water? Are we seeing reduced use of water? Are we seeing soil erosion? These kinds of things are measures that are concrete on the farm, and if we're successful, will drive outcomes even beyond just this value chain. So I think it's really important for us to stay focused not on this practice at this moment is the right thing, because best agricultural practice is always changing. And we really need to be ready to say these new things that are coming in. There are, nano bubbles for pest solutions and all sorts of really amazing things. And we want to be open to the path that's taking us down towards the better outcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. I'm looking at the time now. We have 3 minutes left. We talked about the measuring, how to show that it is valuable. I think that is really important to measure. And I also think that I feel that it's also important to just now get going with this instead of using years and years to argue about the definitions. On the other hand, I think that standards are quite important as well to actually align the actions, but also communicate this to consumers. But we shouldn't get caught there. It's an interesting point, Charlie, on minimum standards. Should the standard be that these are the ones that we actually don't do at all, and then everything else is above that? and just makes the product, for example, better. Focusing on the outcomes, I think, is also quite important, because the actions on the farms are very diverse. Different farms do different things in their different environments. Instead of looking at the outcomes or saying that you have to do this and this and this, look at the outcomes and measure that. There are quite interesting initiatives going on in the world to actually help measuring, to verifying the work done in regenerative agriculture and the impact, and showing that impact. I would also like to get back to what we already have in the chat, is the kind of the short-term versus long-term focus within the supply chain. How does the supply chain actually work? What is the thinking, the core ideology in the supply chain? And I think also about the shorter or the longer supply chains, because if we have very long supply chains, the control in the different stages is much smaller, and also the way from the farmer to the consumer is much longer. The shorter that is, I think, the more easy it is actually also to consume communicate to consumers what this is all about, and it's more motivating for the farmer if it's shorter between the farm and the fork. So these are maybe my takeouts from your discussion. You have very excellent suggestions, things that I think are both important but also implementable. It takes some will, but if there is a will, there is a way. So we have 65 seconds. If someone wants to add something now, it is the time. And I want to thank you all for a very good discussion and your input. Do you have anything you want to add now?
Our vote of thanks to you, Michaela, and Ulla, for keeping us on track.
Thank you very much. And as said, these are the summary will be presented later in the big group.
Yeah. Thank you for making my job difficult, because you were so active with your comments and really good explanations. So I've tried to capture all relevant things, and it was good that we were writing some of them, the things on the chatter, so I could copy them also directly, so we are not missing anything. But then I have 5 minutes sort of to look at my notes and try to come up with key points, because we have 5 minutes to present what was discussed in the group. So keep thumbs up for me that we will make a good summary in the next session. But see you in 5 seconds.
Yeah, thank you all.